people know them, but inside the industry, they are the stars. They are the directors who make or mar a film. Behind the stars and technicians stand the essential talent of one man, the director. What did irritate me was that if ever I had an interview, if anybody asked to see me, after I'd become a film director, the one question was, what's it like doing a man's job?
The fact is that we have to accept that in this historical moment, there aren't very many women directors. So we are an oddity, and however much we may crave the space to be taken, in a sense, purely for what we do, the skills, what we do, and the interest of the things we make, there is always going to be that interest in us as an oddity, and I think the only way to take that is to accept it and use it in a positive, constructive way, accept it as a fact, and hope that then, though, that isn't going to be the only thing that people are interested in, the fact that we're women.
Quite a job, did you have to go?
I found meeting with Wendy Toye very moving in terms of historical continuity. It was actually very, very exciting to meet a woman who had been directing in the industry over the time span when she worked. It made me realise how much it's a bit of a wound, that there isn't that feeling of historical continuity always.
Say so.
In fact, you've been such a success, I think you should take over more often. Then I can go out and get myself a job.
Not on your life. If you leave me alone again with that dreadful brood for 5 minutes, I'll... As a matter of fact, darling, I made an awful hash of it. I wouldn't be a woman if the entire United Nations went down on their bended knees and begged me to be. Do you know what a woman has to be? A cross between a saint in a dray horse, a diplomat in an automatic washing machine, a psychiatrist in a bulldozer, a sanitary engineer and a mannequin.
Darling, I do know what a woman has to be.
Of course you do.
Wendy and I have been put together in a programme directed by yourself, another woman director. And the fact that we've been put together because our films are really very different, have been made at very different times, and although there are connections and links, interesting ones, nevertheless, the clearest link between us is the fact that we are two women. So the focus is on our gender rather than on our being directors, or rather a combination of those two things, but with the emphasis on our being women. So we can't in a way we can't shy away from that, but I think we should demand also not to be sort of ghettoized by that.
I am concerned with redressing the balance. Are you reconciled with your own history?
Ruby?
Do you know what it is?
Ruby?
Well, it was like meeting an old friend in a way, or a young friend. Wasn't it? Didn't you think? I mean, it wasn't a feeling of... I suppose because we're so wrapped up in the same sort of thing, we immediately got to the root of the matter. And of course, you wouldn't let us talk before we actually were on camera, so we just said, how do you do, and kept absolutely silent. So that when we did talk, we went straight to the things that interested us about each other.
Wendy, you have an amazing history. You started off training as a dancer at 3 years of age, and I understand you were known as Wendy Toye, the Pocket Wonder.
Yes.
You've gone on to choreograph and dance in an endless number of shows. You've also directed a number of plays, films for television and feature films. So you have a very, very rich, creative and productive history. I'd be very interested to know what you think is the relationship, how it affected your work as a director, having that big history as a performer beforehand.
I think it helped in one way, because I think that you're in sympathy with actors and in sympathy with their problems. But I think it also was a difficulty, because the first film I made was Stranger, which was based on A Shape of Music. We didn't have enough money to have playback. All I had was a metronome and a little portable gramophone in which I played some music, which was music that we weren't going to use in the end.
It wasn't what you call a big place, but big enough. Big enough.
The whole thing was formed in phrases of music, really.
You'd think they'd never had a stranger in town before. You'd think I was peculiar looking or something. You'd have thought I was a man from Mars.
I couldn't quite understand how you had managed to make him walk perfectly on the beat, and I thought, now this is an extraordinary relationship with the composer is here. So you've explained how you managed to do
metronome,
that. Yeah.
yes, and of course one had to be very careful that you didn't have half a beat before he started a shot, or we'd have been up the creek.
Yeah. But the
So it
whole
wasn't
feeling
easy.
of the film was choreographed. Another thing that was very interestingly handled in that film, in a sense, was the whole notion of disguise.
Oh, isn't that remarkable?
The way the actor was originally set up as an eccentric, and then it was revealed that he was something quite different underneath. It seemed to be almost a comment about acting itself.
You wouldn't recognize me now, Mr. Latham, would you? Would you? Would you?
He was very lucky how it happened with The Stranger, because one night Korda was going to show a feature film to some friends of his, and he asked for some shorts to be sent up to go with it, with his feature film. And the librarian there had run this and had thought it was quite good. So he sent it up to be seen. And that night they ran the short film first, and Korda was so impressed with it that he got on to British Lion and said, could he, under his banner, send it to the Cannes Festival? And it won the award with Cocteau on the board of directors. So it was very lucky, and then it had its success after that. It might have been on the shelves to this day if that hadn't happened.
Oh, haven't I told you? I'm going to show you the best trick of all. I had 15 years in jail to think this one out. You're very privileged. I've never shown it to anyone else before. Now, watch carefully.
Jason, what the devil?
I take this little knife on the end of my umbrella.
No.
I put the point of it just
No. No.
there.
No. No.
And I
Push.
Soon after Stranger had the success that it had, The Stranger Left No Card, both Alan Bedell and I were put under contract by Alex Korda. And then when you're a contract artist, in those days, of course, it was very different. I couldn't really choose subject matter ever. I wanted very much to do more sort of stylized fantasy, which is what The Stranger was. But after Alex Korda died, and I think if he hadn't, maybe I'd have had more chance to do the fantasy things because he quite liked them. But my contract was handed over to Rank, and then I got offered really more straight comedy than anything else.
Should we go down, darling?
Certainly not, darling. We're going up.
Box office success was all important in those days, of course. And as a new director, I think it was even more important that the films were popular. Otherwise, I don't think I would have got another film to make. I really don't. I think I think in practically all the professions now, you're as good as your last project.
It's brilliant, this scene, I think.
even remember it, Sally. Oh, yes, I can now. No criticism to Jill at all if you show the little bit of that number. I think I could have been much more inventive during the number, and I think we should have more cutaways to the people watching, because the number was there to get their character and their relationship with her a little bit more understood and a bit more humorous. But I think I've been remarkably dull about it, seeing it again now. I haven't seen it for years and years and years.
I'd like to find my own oasis, a perfect paradise for two, far away.
And that's as far as I've ever gone in the sort of, as you say, kind of exploitation of a girl. But she was a very well-known singer in those days. That was her style of singing when she did her cabaret act. And that is what she was supposed to be in the film. It wasn't as though it was exploiting her as a person, it was exploiting her as a performer more.
In the early days, I was often to be seen tied to tracks and hanging from cliffs. I managed to be feverish, yet cool, passionate, yet pure, aloof, and yet totally available.
Let's talk about Gold Diggers, right? Didn't quite get the significance of the title. Why did you call it Gold Diggers?
Well, I have to tell you that it started off being called just Gold,
Yes.
and then there was a problem because there was another film called Gold, which
Yes,
was
of course
discovered
there
a bit
was,
later on.
yes.
Yeah. So we had to change titles. And eventually the Gold Diggers was arrived at partly as a kind of ironic comment on the early Gold Diggers films.
Yes.
In a sense, because the film is a lot about the female performer, which the early Gold Diggers were about.
Stranded, we were always stranded.
But the early Gold Diggers films were all about, in a way, making a connection between women as performers and almost women as prostitutes, or women trying to get married in order to, that was their means of earning a living, so they were digging for gold, digging for the right man.
I couldn't take it anymore. Please, please, please give me back my pleasure. Please give me back my good night out. Please give me back my leisure time. I've got the pleasure anew. I'm seeing red.
And I suppose that the way that this Gold Diggers film looks at women is to say that you can find yourself, or you can find your own path without necessarily having to turn to a man in the same way, but without a sense of blame that female performers have had to do that before.
Yes.
So it's kind of an affectionate acknowledgement of the history of female performers, and
Yes.
also saying maybe there's a different way of doing it now too.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I had to write down a few notes about it, actually, because it's such an intriguing film. There's so much in it, so you'll forgive me if I have a look now and again, but I can remember lots of things I want to ask you without it at the minute. In the first ballroom scene, did you mean us to recognise Julie Christie when she came down the staircase? Because I wasn't sure it was her.
I did assume that people would recognise her on some level, but that wasn't really the point of the image. The point was to evoke an almost archetypal screen moment, part of the history of images of women in the cinema. And like elsewhere in the film, it refers to that archetype. At the moment when she comes down the staircase, she could be all of the women who've ever descended staircases in grand ballrooms. She could be Vivian Leigh in Gone with the Wind. She's the belle of the ball. I think the way the film is structured is that
Some of the images are elusive to start with, and that is deliberate. They're set up in a slightly ambiguous way, in a way that is not resolved and is not complete, and only becomes complete by the end of the film, so that threads are set up and connections are set up and held, if you like, suspended in mid-air until later. Archetypal cliche of the cinema and of fairy tales that the princess, the female, the beautiful one, remains helpless, remains lost until that moment when the prince arrives, hopefully on a white horse, and whisks her off onto the horizon where she finds her power through him. So by contradicting it, by having a woman come in on a horse, it was a way of restoring that sense of power unto woman herself through another woman. So it's like we don't need to be rescued in that way. Being female is not equated with being helpless.
Sally, I think it was a brilliant stroke to have Julie Christie in your film, because in a funny sort of way, one's always felt from the publicity and from her publicity that she's felt she's been exploited, rather, in some of the roles. I don't know that I agree, because I think she's done some wonderful things and I've seen her be terrific. But it was a marvellous role for her. Was it difficult to persuade her? Was it easy? How did you go about it?
Phoned her up and showed her the script outline. It was in the very early stages, and she considered it during the time when the script was being developed, and then, in a sense, the script was fully developed with her in mind once she had agreed. So it was partly written around her. She's actually, I think, very pleased with some of the things that she's done. She wouldn't by any means think of herself as always exploited, but I think that this particular role in The Gold Diggers is somewhat of a comment on many of her other roles, or in general on the role of the actress.
Yes.
But I think that the part would have been different if it was for somebody else, and that it's her particular, the power of her face, because she's known in this almost icon-like way,
yes,
as an emblem or symbol of the 60s and 70s, a real representation of a certain kind of mixture of beauty and independence. And she's become part of our own mythology. That seems to be what a star is about. It's an icon. And so to investigate the nature of the star or the icon, it seemed to be important to have it actually played by a star, or it wouldn't have that kind of power.
I'm born in a beam of light. I move continuously, yet I'm still. I'm larger than life, yet do not breathe. Only in the darkness am I visible.
I couldn't guess the riddle. And I love games and I love riddles, and I couldn't guess it.
You can see me, but never touch me. I can speak to you, but never hear you. You know me intimately, and I know you not at all. We are strangers, and yet you take me inside of you. What am I?
The riddle is about cinema itself, is about the image of woman, and is about gold, and those are the three main strands of the film. So I'm born in a beam of light. Well, film is projected through light. I can speak to you but never listen. That's a statement both about the star on the screen. It's also about cinema, and it's about, in a sense, the way that gold speaks to one, and so on. So each of the lines is a reflection on one or other, or all of those themes. and is intended to open out that kind of space in the brain somewhere that stays then for the whole of the rest of the film for the viewer.
Sir, I'd like to have some more information about these figures I'm typing.
What I was trying to do as a way of showing the connections between women and money was to set up two central characters. One, Ruby, who is investigating the nature of herself as a star, the nature of herself as an iconic figure, looking inside as a way of looking at what that means, looking inside herself. And the other, Celeste, looking outside at the economic system that she finds herself in, the way she is helping to circulate money.
So, how does gold really function in the world? As its blood. Just as blood flows through the veins of the body, so is gold, the pure, bright blood of the earth.
And between the two of them, the way of looking outside and the way of looking inside, they form the celestial ruby, in fact, which is the alchemist's formula for how to transform base matter into gold. The philosopher's stone is another way that it's been put. So I suppose that what the film is saying, this Gold Diggers as compared to the early Gold Diggers film, is that before we can move on, we have to have both an objective view of our situation and how we relate to the economic structure, and the subjective view of what our history is, what our memory is, how our image is formed, and that the combination of those two factors will take us forward. Whereas the early Gold Diggers films were, in a sense, a portrayal of where women have been stuck, have been the victims of an economic system and of an image formed by men that is at odds with our own progress.